All right. I threw it out there on the Twitter chain, private discussion there about starting to carve through opponents. I didn't know if anybody was ready to talk about FAU. I certainly am not. We could probably hold off and start our opponents breakdown next week by the looks of Tony's facial expression.
I actually did. I mean, I've got Florida Atlantic open here. I took a little bit of a look, and I was thinking, there are going to be so many people who are watching Florida Atlantic for the first time ever in August who have never watched them play before. All they know about him is Lane Kiffin.
Yeah.
And, just looking like we can talk about them later on, but it's Lane Kiffin, his tactic or the way he goes about building this program, that you see why they can go win like 10 in a row. And then last year they have a losing record, and who knows what they'll be this year. You bring in a bunch of, I guess, cast-offs, and sometimes it works. Generally it doesn't. And you hope like the year it works, that propels you into a new job. But he's in a tough spot because everybody already knows him. They have seen him fail. And so he almost has to turn FAU into UCF, do what Scott Frost did if he's ever going to move on. So I don't know that he can continue to cast his lot with cast-offs. He almost has to build from the ground up and build FAU into something that isn't like temporary housing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they're a guarantee game for whoever they play outside of Conference USA, which, is kind of the league for misfit toys right now in college football. It's, not good enough to be the American, but a step above the Sun Belt and a step above the FCS ranks, barely. And, again, you don't see a lot of that league's games even on television. I mean, you have to really hunt and find their games. They played some Big Ten schools in recent years. I think they played Wisconsin 2 years ago on the road at Wisconsin, lost 31-14. So, it is what it is. He's got some athletes from the state of Florida. He also has DeAndre Francois, who transferred in there after spring football was complete, and he was the quarterback at Florida State last year. He was dismissed from Florida State for some off-the-field issues. And again, here's Florida Atlantic. We'll take your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, whatever, and that's how he's going to build his program. And I think if he's able to put a winner on the field there at Florida Atlantic, I wouldn't look for Lane Kiffin to be the head coach there for much longer. I mean, this is a guy for, say what you will about him, former head coach at Tennessee, former head coach at USC, former head coach at the Oakland Raiders. Even if it was just a cup of coffee at each spot, you think all of the trials and tribulations he's been through, the validation he got as the offensive coordinator at Alabama for a year or two, have helped him kind of, his chance to get back to the bigs. And if he can win 8 or 9 games at Florida Atlantic, maybe an athletic director will take a flyer on Lane Kiffin. I don't know, but we'll see. I think it was our friend Pat Chun, who used to be at Ohio State as an assistant athletic director, who hired him at Florida Atlantic. Pat Chun is now the athletic director at Washington State. And, he himself has kind of moved up to the bigs, and perhaps that's one to watch down the line if that job would ever come open. You never know what's going to happen with that guy at Washington State. So, at any rate, that's my feeling on Florida Atlantic. Going to be a good athletic team, have good skill position players, but are not going to match up in the trenches with Ohio State.
Tony, the fine folks up in Akron, which is only a couple hours from you, probably taking exception when you mentioned that nobody's watched Florida Atlantic play. Well, they played Akron in a bowl game 2 years ago. And of course, the nation, let alone the city of Akron, was locked in on that game.
Well, Mark, just because it's on national television doesn't mean the nation is watching it.
I actually remember to show you what a nerd I am. I somehow remember the score of that game. FAU won that game 50-3. That was the biggest point spread going into the game, and then they backed it up and won 50-3. Yeah, Lane Kiffin hit that program hard, blew it up. They won 11 games. They won the conference championship game, big bowl win, and then they slumped last year. So we'll see if he has any staying power.
Well, when they came in last year with expectations, they went to Oklahoma to open the season, and people were like, hey, watch out for this game. This is going to be a good one. And they got torched. And I guess that's Lane Kiffin with expectations, right? Now, maybe he should have stayed at Alabama longer, but I don't think Nick Saban wanted him any longer. So, where else is he going to go? I don't know that he can go anywhere else.
That was my question, Tony. Regardless of what happens this season, where does Lane Kiffin go from here? He's got Jim Harbaugh-like antics and tactics, but he doesn't have a Jim Harbaugh record, right? And if I'm comparing you against Jim Harbaugh's record, it's bad. Like, I feel like the fans will put up with only so much depending on how many games you win. And I don't know what that hump is for Florida Atlantic. I really don't. Or for Lane Kiffin. I just don't know who's willing to put up with him. And I honestly think USC and Tennessee were gifts. And the fact that he was at Alabama and had some marginal success, well, a lot of success on Nick Saban's coattails, I just don't really think it's ever going to translate for him. And that's not a low blow. I've just not seen anything different from him. So Phil Steele had a couple of guys from Florida Atlantic listed as first team, but they're already, Buckeyes are 27-point favorite. So I'll take the over on that one, I think. I think it's going to be a mess.
All right, so that's week number 1 in Columbus, August 31st against FAU and Lane Kiffin, and then he goes back to field his team in front of the retirees of Boca Raton. Boca Raton. Yes.
Del Boca Vista.